The Tale of Mrs. Tittlemouse by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there was a wood mouse, and her name was Mrs. Tittlemouse. She lived in a bank under a hedge. Such a funny house! There were yards and yards of sandy passages leading to storerooms and nut cellars and seed cellars, all amongst the roots of the hedge. There was a kitchen, a parlor, a pantry, and a larder. Also, there was Mrs. Tittlemouse's bedroom, where she slept in a little box bed. Mrs. Tittlemouse was a most terribly tidy, particular little mouse, always sweeping and dusting the soft sandy floors. Sometimes a beetle lost its way in the passages. "Shoo! Shoo! Little dirty feet!" said Mrs. Tittlemouse, clattering her dustpan. And one day a little old woman ran up and down in a red spotty cloak. "Your house is on fire, Mother Ladybird. Fly away home, dear children." Another day a big fat spider came in to shelter from the rain. "Beg pardon, is this not Miss Muffet's?" "Go away, you bold bad spider, leaving ends of cobweb all over my nice clean house." She bundled the spider out at a window. He let himself down the hedge with a long thin bit of string. Mrs. Tittlemouse went on her way to a distant storeroom to fetch cherry stones and thistledown seed for dinner. All along the passage she sniffed and looked at the floor. I smell of honey. Is it the cowslips outside in the hedge? I am sure I can see the marks of little dirty feet." Suddenly, round the corner, she met Babbity Bumble. "Zzz, bzz, bzz," said the bumblebee. Mrs. Tittlemouse looked at her severely. She wished that she had a broom. "Good day, Babbity Bumble. I should be glad to buy some beeswax. But what are you doing down here? Why do you always come in at the window and say zzz, bzz, bzz?" Mrs. Tittlemouse began to get cross. "Zzz, whizz, whizz," replied Babbity Bumble in a peevish squeak. She sidled down a passage and disappeared into a storeroom which had been used for acorns. Mrs. Tittlemouse had eaten the acorns before Christmas. The storeroom ought to have been empty, but it was full of untidy dry moss. Mrs. Tittlemouse began to pull out the moss. 3 or 4 other bees put their heads out and buzzed fiercely. "I am not in the habit of letting lodgings. This is an intrusion," said Mrs. Tittlemouse. "I will have them turned out. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I wonder who would help me. Buzz, whizz, whizz. I will not have Mr. Jackson. He never wipes his feet." Mrs. Tittlemouse decided to leave the bees till after dinner. When she got back to the parlor, she heard someone coughing in a fat voice, and there sat Mr. Jackson himself. He was sitting all over a small rocking chair, twiddling his thumbs and smiling, with his feet on the fender. He lived in a drain below the hedge, in a very dirty, wet ditch. "How do you do, Mr. Jackson?" "Dearie me, you have got very wet." Thank you, Mrs. Tittlemouse. I'll sit a while and dry myself," said Mr. Jackson. He sat and smiled, and the water dripped off his coat tails. Mrs. Tittlemouse went round with a mop. He sat such a while that he had to be asked if he would take some dinner. First she offered him cherry stones. Thank you, Mrs. Tittlemouse. No teeth, no teeth, no teeth," said Mr. Jackson. He opened his mouth most unnecessarily wide. He certainly had not a tooth in his head. Then she offered him thistledown seed. "Tiddly widdly widdly, poof, poof, poof," said Mr. Jackson. He blew the thistledown all over the room. "Thank you, thank you, thank you, Mrs. Tittlemouse. Now, what I really, really should like would be a little dish of honey." "I am afraid I have not got any, Mr. Jackson," said Mrs. Tittlemouse. "Tiddly widdly widdly, Mrs. Tittlemouse," said the smiling Mr. Jackson. "I can smell it. That's why I came to call." Mr. Jackson rose ponderously from the table and began to look into the cupboards. Mrs. Tittlemouse followed him with a dishcloth to wipe his large wet footmarks off the parlor floor. When he had convinced himself that there was no honey in the cupboards, he began to walk down the passage. "Indeed, indeed, you will stick fast, Mr. Jackson. Tiddly widdly widdly, Mrs. Tittlemouse." First, he squeezed into the pantry. "Tiddly widdly widdly, no honey, Mrs. Tittlemouse." There were 3 creepy crawlies hiding in the plate rack. 2 of them got away, but the littlest one he caught. Then he squeezed into the larder. Miss Butterfly was tasting the sugar, but she flew away out of the window. "Tiddly widdly widdly, Mrs. Tittlemouse, you seem to have plenty of visitors." "And without any invitation," said Mrs. Thomasina Tittlemouse. They went along the sandy passage. "Tiddly widdly, buzz, whiz, whiz." Finally he found the bees, and Mr. Jackson knew that bees make honey. "Get out of our storeroom, you nasty old toad!" squealed Bobbity Bumble as Mr. Jackson pulled away the moss in search of the honey. The upset bees angrily buzzed around him. Mrs. Tittlemouse hid in the nut cellar until the racket died down. When she finally entered the room, it was empty and very, very untidy. "Oh, dearie me! Never did I see such a smelly, honeyish, mossyish, thistledowny mess," she cried. "And such big, dirty toad footprints all over my nice, clean storeroom. It will take me a long time to tidy this up." And indeed it did. The little mouse spent the next 2 weeks cleaning up all the mess that her unwanted visitors had left behind. She scrubbed down the storerooms, rubbed the furniture with beeswax, and polished her tin spoons until they shone like new. When she was finished, Mrs. Tittlemouse invited all her friends over to the house to celebrate, except for Mr. Jackson, who had to sit outside. But he didn't mind, especially when the field mice passed him acorns full of honeydew through the window. "Your very good health, Mrs. Tittlemouse," he croaked. "Your very good health indeed." Hi, if you like this video, please give this a like and hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon to get notified whenever I release a new video.